All right. How you guys doing?
Good.
Cool. So there's no booze, so I'm gonna go quick. So I'm supposed to talk to you about PhoneGap, and I fully intend to do that, but I also did this thing called WTF.js. Do we have any JavaScript developers in the house? All right. So do we have anyone who does not write JavaScript in the house? Well, those people probably never will after this. So let's jump over to a terminal and make this a little bigger. I'm just gonna do this for fun. Whoa, look at this shit. Really? It's weird. What's up with that bar there? Alright, so there's this thing called Node. You might have heard of it. It's JavaScript, so there's nothing really all that special about it. And this is a REPL, and so it's a read, evaluate, print loop. And so I'm gonna start really simple, and then we're just gonna get more and more difficult as we go. So true is true. True is a statement in JavaScript. And there's something called the logical not operator. And so I can use the logical not operator to cast true false if I wanted to. And so that's actually really useful because then you can test truthiness of something. And so obviously I just casted true to false back to true again, and I use the grouping operators to do that. Now why is that useful? Well, you'll see this in JavaScript all the time where people want to figure out the truthiness of something. So is a string true? No, it's not. At least not an empty string. What about an array? Can you guess it? Who knows? Alright, so an array is true, but an empty string is not. So we can get into trouble with this. So with the JavaScript, and I won't go too far on this one, but like with JavaScript we have this thing called the double equals operator. It's also called the abstract equality operator. This allows you to cast something to its plausible type. But this means that this operator is a little bit tricky. It can change things on you. And so we can ask, is an array falsy? And it turns out an array is falsy, even though an empty array up there was truthy. And so what actually happened when I just did that is I cast that falsy statement into a number, believe it or not. So false could actually be cast to a number by using a plus operator. This would be the same thing as doing this. Okay? So that means that truthiness might actually be cast to a number. Which means that we could take true and add it to true, and we'd get 2. So it gets better. So now I've got a string with a 0 and an object, and that is going to return the object, which means that it's true because an empty object is true, and so is a string. A string, that'd be true as well. So that kind of makes sense. Would 0 be equal to a string that's 0? Well, it turns out in the abstract equality operator reality, those things are the same thing, which if you're a programmer, you could probably recognize that might be problematic. Not nearly as bad as this. All right, so strings are neat. I am a string, right? Is I am a string an instance of string? Nope, it's not. So what the hell is that?
It's 7 o'clock.
Oops, syntax error. So a string's a string, it's just not an instance of string. And I can explain. So if I were to do this and pass string to the constructor, I get a string. But if I use the new operator, I get an object. And so essentially what we were saying back there is new string, to string. That's funny to me. So if you've done any templating JavaScript, you've probably seen this before, Funan. What happened there? Well, we just cast bar to a number, and of course bar is not a number, so I got not a number, and I just concatenated a number to not a number, giving me Funan. So let's see. Magically increasing numbers is another feature of JavaScript. So JavaScript implements only one type of number. And this is a feature, it's actually not a bug. We kind of like this about JavaScript. There's all these different types. If you have a number, it's a number, and it implements something called the IEEE, wait, I got it written down because I never remember this shit. Where is it? The IEEE 754 double precision floating point spec, which basically means it's shitty at math. Can't do precision decimal math. And so this ends up leading us to code humor like this. Is 0.1 plus 0.2 strictly equal to 0.3? It is not. It turns out it's 0.3 and a little bit. Whatever reason. This also leads to other code humor. This is just a consequence of how functions get evaluated. So 3 is not greater than 2 is not greater than 1. And the reason for this is because we evaluated 3 is greater than 2 first, giving us true. We remember from earlier, true actually evaluates down to 1, so I just asked if 1 was greater than 1. So the way to fix this would be to go, is 3 greater than 2 or greater than equal to 1? Yeah. Numbers have a lot of problems in JavaScript. So the plus operator will cast to a string, but in this particular case, it's going to concatenate. But don't worry, at least the minus operator does as expected. And this can lead to problems. But we could fix this actually. Right? So that makes sense in a way. So we just minus 1. Gave us 3. Infinity is an interesting concept. So number, infinity. Infinity is a number. Oops. Display. Sorry about that. Gotta convince Adobe to give me the new one with more RAM. Is this being recorded? Okay, so I show you how to cast stuff to numbers. Infinity is kind of an interesting concept. You can do things like parse float to get like a number out of something. So float something with decimals, right? And we can pass infinity to parse float. Cool, does what we think. We can also do parse int. So according to parse int, so I guess in the JavaScript standards groups, they were thinking, well, you know, infinity, that would have like a fractional thing. Integer, there's no way it'd be a whole number. So infinity is actually just 1 divided by 0, right? And it turns out, it made me think, I'm like, can I minus 1 from infinity? And I get infinity, okay, that makes sense, I guess. I wonder though, can I minus infinity from 1? Turns out you can. And, oh my God. This made me wonder, what about strict equality of 0 to negative 0? And it turns out 0 and negative 0 are a thing as well. But infinity and negative infinity are totally not the same thing, but 0 and negative 0 are. That makes sense. That makes sense. So math has a thing called max value. It's a big number. Number has a thing called max value, sorry. And we also have a thing called min value, which is really small, but not too small. It's a little bit bigger than that, which is pretty funny. So there's other code humor that can be done with this stuff. So math has a function called max and min. And it turns out math.max is not bigger than math.min. There's a good reason for that. So math.max takes a bunch of arguments and it'll give you the highest one. And the way it does this is it has a comparator. And guess what that comparator is? It compares to the smallest possible number, negative infinity. It's weird shit. Math, instance of math, it is not. Type of not a number. It's number. So it's not a number. Instance of number? No, obviously not. Fuck. Isnan's interesting. So I passed null to isnan, and it turns out null is not a non-number. So okay, that makes sense. But that means that we must be casting to a number, which made me wonder what happens when you cast null to a number when you get a 0. So isNaN null is strictly equal to, or not strictly equal, but abstractly equal to 0. Not that useful. I have a couple of others, and then I'll get into the real stuff. So an array does not equal an array. Those are two different arrays. I can buy into that. An array does equal not an array, however. Why would that be? All the Java guys are just like eating this up. So what happened there? So we just cast an array to a Boolean, and then the abstract equality operator casted both sides back to a number. So we actually just did this. And this one stumped Brendan Ike. That's how these rules are. So we actually just said, are these two zeros the same thing? Generally the rule is to avoid the double equals operator, and I hope this talk teaches you at least that. So the classic one is type of null object. This was a mistake. Null instance of object, true, false. So it's not an object, but it is an object. Great. I got a couple others, but I'm not going to get into them. So let's talk about PhoneGap. Shit, my browser does it. Sorry, I'm ready for this. Everyone's like, what's that R function? Okay. Has anyone here built a PhoneGap app? A few people have? All right, maybe we'll do that first. So I'm going to just jump to my desktop. I just downloaded PhoneGap. If we look at the PhoneGap distribution, there's some stuff. I'm going to go into the lib directory, iOS directory. Who here is running iOS? Who here is running Android? Windows Phone? 4 people from Microsoft. Blackberries? I'm the only Canadian. Okay, so in PhoneGap, you get these command line tools to help you out, and I'll talk a bit more about those in a bit. And the baseline command line tool is to create a project. So I'm going to say create on my desktop a project called foobar, io.brian.foo, and I'll call the project foobar. So path, a package name, somewhere over here is foobar. And if I look at this, it's just a regular old Xcode project. So I'm going to launch that. The running joke we have is Xcode is exactly like Eclipse. It just looks like iTunes. Super true. So PhoneGap apps are all the same. They all have this www folder. And maybe that's because we like Apache, I don't know. And may not come as a surprise, inside of the www, yes?
Does PhoneGap not have a UI? Do you have to go through the command line for everything?
No, you don't have to use the command line. I just do because it's faster. There's lots of ways to create projects. I just prefer the command line. It's totally up to you. I try to show people the way I would do it though. This is quicker. But yeah, generally we don't really get involved in the UI. So in here, I was making fun of us earlier. I just generated this project, and inside the www folder there's a bunch of HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. We're going to kick up an instance of PhoneGap in a second. I just want you to see that I'm not cheating and no tricks up my sleeve. This is just markup. It's in a folder. We'll look at what app.initialize does in a second. And I'm going to do this on the iPhone 5.1 simulator simply because I don't trust my resolution right now. We're going to build that. It's going to kick up simulator. It's going to launch the application. And right here it says device is ready. So we built an app. Let's take a look at that app. This is the part where I make fun of us. PhoneGap's an open source project, so we're not really too hardcore about who gets what code in, but this one got all enterprise architect on us. So we got an app global on the window with a method called initialize that you may remember we called inline down here for some reason, which is fine. It calls bind events. Bind events binds to the device ready event. Device ready event calls this.onDeviceReady. This.onDeviceReady calls app received event. Like, why the fuck would you do it that way? But whatever. And then we've got, we grab a couple of elements and we change their styles so that we get this sort of pulsing devices ready thing. And that's it. That's the whole application. We don't really get involved in the rest of it with you. So we built an app. These slides are online too, by the way, if you want to skip ahead. That is not me. It looks like me. It's actually Dave Matthews. Somebody took that picture at the airport and then tagged it as me, and then it went around as me. So now I'm trying to like defud that by putting my name beside it. I don't know. Anyways, I don't hang out at the airport eating pizza in a miniskirt. Not usually. So PhoneGap's for building apps. You probably got that part. One thing I think that's a lot different than us and other people is that we're standards-based and future-friendly. So we implemented geolocation before any browser did. And all the API surface that we implement against existing or emerging standards. And this is really important to us because our mission is to see that you eventually move your code into a web browser. We're not trying to build you into PhoneGap. We're trying to build you up as a web browser. Everything we do is open source, Apache licensed. Turns out we built this crazy extensibility layer without meaning to do it, and it's now a huge software community. PhoneGap gets downloaded roughly 300,000 times a month. So since joining Adobe, we started calling it a platform. I thought that was funny. So Apache Cordova is our open source project. This was the kernel of PhoneGap when we donated that back to Apache. PhoneGap is a distribution of Apache Cordova. If there's some difficulty with the thinking there, just imagine the difference between WebKit and Safari. It's the same idea, Chromium and Chrome. And we also have a cloud-based build service, which I'll talk about a little bit more later on. Mostly I'm going to talk to you about Apache Cordova, which is the open source guts, and this awesome robot that this Japanese dude drew. So mobile operating system compatibility and extensibility layer. We like to characterize the problem space that we have by looking at what it takes to build these applications today across all these different platforms. It's not insurmountable. It's actually not even all that hard. You just have to have around $5,000 worth of devices, be proficient in 8 programming languages, and have 2 operating systems running. It's not that bad. It's expensive, but it's not bad. The other issue that we're sort of faced with is there's a lot of different devices coming around every year, and we don't really know what's going to happen. You know, I'd love it if I could have planned for the new screen dimensions in iOS in the last release, but I couldn't. That just landed in my lap, and I had to deal with it. Luckily, with PhoneGap, it's pretty easy to deal with because we have a web view, and those things are pretty good at displaying flexible interfaces. And then there's the whole issue of these different tablets that are coming out, different form factors. And the answer might be responsive web design. It's definitely got a lot of hype right now, but that's not without a bunch of issues too. With responsive web design, we basically have the ability to use media queries to conditionally load CSS into a page, which is great, but the problem is you have to still load all of the CSS over the network before you can choose what part of it you want to show. So I don't know that this is perfect. If we were to have built PhoneGap based on the current market share numbers, we would have been focusing on BlackBerry back in 2008. And I'm glad we didn't. We have great Android support today. And I think it would be naive to believe that we know what's going to happen. This market is still changing rapidly, and it has not consolidated whatsoever. This has nothing to do with PhoneGap, but I think it's relevant to your interests as web developers and people who do HTML5 development. There's this new trend of basically kernels of an operating system with a web browser running on top. So Tizen is being a collaboration by Samsung and Intel. It's essentially WebKit on top of a Linux kernel. We're not going to talk about WebOS because it makes me sad. Firefox OS is really interesting. Firefox OS is the Gecko runtime on top of the Linux kernel. This is being developed by Mozilla. And they're not going to roll out in North America. They're just going to skip North America completely, and they're going straight to the emerging markets. They're going to start with Brazil, and then go to India, China, and Russia next. And the reasoning for that is they know they can't change the current situation in the Western world, but they can definitely get a big foothold in the next billion people that are about to come online by smartphones. So Bozo is worth watching. And then there's another effort called WebOS. And if you think about it, Chrome OS, that's a mobile operating system that's also web-based, and so is Windows 8. So all the big players are moving to this model, and I guess all I'm doing is validating your choice to be at an HTML5 meetup right now. So core platform support, we support all of these phones, and we actually are rolling out support this year for all of these devices too. We just dropped Windows 8 in PhoneGap 2.3 release candidate. Yeah, all of this is coming. So you're sort of left with like this huge issue of all these SDKs, all these problems. How do you deal with it? How do you choose what valves to pick? And the thing we've been saying for years is that this was kind of what the internet was all about in the beginning. So web technology solved all these problems. People that claim that cross-platform can't be done usually do it on a blog on the internet from any device in the world at any time of their choosing, which is crazy when you think about it. Cross-platform was solved a long time ago, but that doesn't mean that the web is perfect. There's a lot of problems that remain. The big one being that the web is sandboxed. We have a second-class citizen on the device, and this is not a bug, it's a feature, but it needs to be addressed. The web also has a bad offline story. There's an awesome talk by a guy named Jake Archibald out there called The App Cache is a Douchebag. I recommend watching it. I won't go through the problems with the app cache because it's another reason why I drink. So you can't get into the App Store distribution model revenue. I don't even think that's a good business model anyways, but it's worth talking about, at least from a discovery standpoint. But the big problem that we feel is that you can't access device APIs. This is why you're a second-class citizen in the web browser. You don't get access to the camera, accelerometer, we kind of do now, but you didn't before. And the web tooling story is poor, although it's getting better. So this is where PhoneGap fits. It's hybrid development. It combines both the idea of using web technology, but we don't hide the underlying implementation that we're dealing with. So PhoneGap's not an IDE. We're not really interested in getting into the IDE business. You can use Dreamweaver if you want to, but we don't lock you in. If you're writing HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, it's probably a good chance that you're very good at writing it in a text editor of your choosing, so we don't want to tell you how to do that. Everyone has their own tools, and the only thing that we all have in common is that the other guy's wrong. We're not a language, so we're not going to do a compile to thing. We don't care about that stuff. You can use things like CoffeeScript and ClojureScript or whatever, your TypeScript if you want. It'll work, but we're not doing that. We're not proprietary, we're not a runtime. I got to get rid of this slide because I just said all that stuff. So PhoneGap is Apache Cordova, which is the open source project. If I had internet, I'd show you the website. Oh, maybe I do have the internet. No, I don't. Cordova.io is where you can go check out what the open source project's all about. Cordova is the place you would go if you wanted to contribute back to PhoneGap. If you wanted to write native code and augment the web browser, that's where you go. But all you need to worry about is PhoneGap itself. So Adobe has 23 people working on PhoneGap full-time. IBM has 6, Microsoft has 3, RIM has 6, Nokia has 2, Google has 3. There's a lot of companies supporting it. Sometimes people ask me if PhoneGap's ready for the enterprise. I'll just show them this slide. Yeah, we're ready. So web standards is also super important to us. Being portable to the future is what we're all about. We work really closely with a group called the Device API Working Group. They were formed in 2008, shortly after PhoneGap sort of started to get some steam. All of our APIs are basically the APIs that W3C has specified in some way or another. Our philosophy is simple is better, and we use brute force. And I can get into that, and we believe the web has solved cross-platform. So simple is better. If you want to sound awesome to your boss, you can say that PhoneGap is a foreign function interface. But really what it is like a total hack. So what we do is we give a way for the web browser to talk to the native code. And in some cases, we do this by creating iframes and trapping URL events on our own protocol handler, which sounds crazy and slow. Actually, maybe I'll just show you that code. So this is Cordova.js, which is our JavaScript. And if I jump into, every platform has, so iOS, Android, BlackBerry, whatever, they all have one function that will be different, and that's the exec function. So that's the thing that does the talking to the native code. And in the case of iOS, you'll see right here we are creating an iframe. And we set that iframe with a protocol of gap : // and that's how we communicate back to the native code. We trap those events on any URL request, the native code. And that's how we communicate to the two sides. And so your immediate reaction would be, well, that's got to be super slow. And it is. This slide's out of date. We get around 450 operations per second. So this isn't good enough to do a game, but it's definitely good enough to get your geolocation. You don't need your geolocation 500 times a second. Probably just need it once. So it works for most cases. So we've got two big goals, and they're audacious goals. Web as a first-class platform is our first goal. What we mean by that is non-sandboxed APIs, and we know that comes with a huge penalty of possible security risk and the rest of it. We're still trying to work through those things. And good tools, which is a big part of our work at Adobe. The second goal is troublesome for a lot of people, so ceasing to exist, being nihilistic, is kind of harsh, but really we think it's the best way for the project to work. We want to be a reference implementation for web browsers, and we'd really rather not be doing this in the first place. So that's where we're coming from. When we first started this stuff, we did what everyone would expect. We created apps using native GUI components, and we abstracted them behind JavaScript. And those metaphors broke down really quickly, and the apps were poor in quality. And we realized that that was the wrong thing to do. The right thing to do is, a tab bar on Android is not a tab bar on iOS. The features and the form factors and the interactions are completely different. But you can create cross-platform applications using web tech and building your own abstractions. But the things that were cross-platform were all the device sensors and data. And so this was the thing that we chose to attack. And this is probably why we have so many implementations. So sensors are common across most devices. Most phones have cameras and accelerometers and GPSs. Data is also common, so file system, media, contacts. And so we've got APIs for all these things. Interestingly, lately there's been some debate at the W3C whether or not a file system is still necessary. And I'll leave this up as an exercise for beers later. Maybe we don't need a file system. Maybe what we need is a good database. Oh, yeah.
Why not calendar?
Huh?
Why not calendar?
IndexedDB. Yeah, I mean, it depends on how far you want to go with your abstraction of what it is. Media is a pretty obvious abstraction. It's cool, man. Yeah, I don't know. Even contacts is kind of questionable, right? That's definitely worth bringing up. So we were Unix geeks at Nitobi and at Adobe. And so freedom of choice is our first thing. And we believe in small single-purpose tools. So we don't tell you how to build your application. If you want to just use the Android bits of PhoneGap, you can do that. If you want to use Android, iOS, and BlackBerry and all the rest of it, you can do that too. So it's a totally opt-in system. You can just use our command line tooling. We also don't dictate how you build your front end. We work with any of the major JavaScript frameworks, and we work with them too, implementing against their stuff. We're not here to pick a winner in DOM frameworks. And we don't dictate IDE choices. I think I've said that a bunch of times, but it's important. So we accidentally created a plugin architecture when we did this whole thing, and we didn't mean to do it. And now a lot of people are building plugins. There's something around 300 plugins in the wild. And so if we don't do something, that doesn't mean you can't. In fact, anybody can. We've documented our plugin API. So if you want to write any native code you want and wire it to the browser, it's as trivial as doing a hello world. And a lot of people found that out, and the community started creating plugins. Facebook, Salesforce, SAP, and Oracle are actually all doing distributions of PhoneGap now with their own custom plugins built in, which is cool. So it would be uncool of me to talk about how rad PhoneGap is without talking about their problems with PhoneGap. One of the key issues is the web versus native debate. We end up always being in the middle of that one because we're kind of blurry. And my opinion is the web is native. So this is just an opinion. People that bring this debate up probably don't understand how browsers work. So let's talk about computers. Operating systems, generally written in C. Guess what? So are browsers. So if a browser doesn't do something, it's not because it can't. It's just because we haven't gotten around to it yet. That's it. There is no fundamental barrier between these things. So PhoneGap plugins kind of kill that debate. However, we do have a serious problem with PhoneGap in that we work with the onboard browser that the device ships with. So an iOS browser is not the same browser that you end up having in Android. It's most certainly not the same as the one you get on a Windows phone. So it's like web development. You have to target different browsers. We've tried building our own WebKits a few times, and you end up with really big executables. In the case of Android 2.3, we may actually start offering a Chrome build, maybe, in the next year, because that browser sucks so bad. And if people want to have the option to build a bigger executable, then maybe we'll give them that. We actually just got that compiling. And then Windows Phone is probably the place where you're going to have the most variance. These different WebKits don't have a lot of differences between them, generally. But Windows Phone has quite a few differences. We paint over some of them. It doesn't have touch events, so we don't do anything to augment that yet. It doesn't have local storage by default, but we implemented local storage, so it does inside of PhoneGap. So yeah, web development's hard. That's why I drink. So hosted services, I don't have an internet connection, so I can't show you build.phonegap.com. That's totally okay. Build.phonegap.com is a hosted cloud service. When we first started building PhoneGap, we would do these trainings, and we'd end up having like a 4-hour training session of how to install and provision an iOS device, and that would suck. We didn't actually build any apps, and we realized the problem with these SDKs is that you have all these different computers that are out there, and people have different types of devices, and it's just a mess. We put all that mess on our servers, and then we have a web service. You upload HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, and we do the compilation on our servers, and then we send you back binaries, and that's all that service does. Probably basically all it'll ever do. This tool, debug.phonegap.com, is a tool called Winery. Has anyone here seen Winery? Okay, a couple of you have. Well, that's cool. I'm going to show it to you guys because it's just too awesome to not show. So Winery is kind of our debugger, and it's an executable. It is on the command line, or you can go to debug.phonegap.com. And so I just kicked up a server on localhost. And that server is serving this really poorly designed web page. And it gives me this script tag, which I just copied. I'm going to go to my desktop. I'm going to paste that script tag into a new file called index.html. I'm going to edit that HTML file. I'm going to add some stuff to it. Whatever. I suck at typing. Okay. Terrible markup, I know. So now check this out. This is where it gets fun. Tear you off. We go. I think we're gonna go over. Yeah. Okay. So Web Inspector Remote is connected. And basically, we ripped out the guts. A guy named Patrick Mueller ripped out the guts of Web Inspector, and then hooked it up with some proxies so that you can embed a script in any website, load it on any device, and be able to inspect it and do stuff with it, just like you do with Chrome Dev Tools normally. JavaScript works, everything works. This might not seem like that big of a deal, but when this is running on your client's phone that you've been trying to debug, this is a huge deal. And so this is kind of our path for debugging right now. This also works with Windows Phone, just as the last release of PhoneGap. It's kind of a big deal. All right. We have support. You go to phonegap.com/support. You can get it. The dirty secret is it's an open source project, so you don't need to go there. My first priority is to find contributors back to PhoneGap. and Cordova. Anyone can contribute, even filing a bug is useful for us. It's a brute force project. We need a lot of people to help us work on it. So if you're interested in that, that's cool. I'm going to quickly roll through our roadmap. Before I do that, I got to explain our release philosophy. So this is a little bit different than classic software projects. Usually classic software projects will have features and they'll attach those to a date. And that's usually why classic software projects fail. We attach dates to releases and release numbers, and features land when they're ready. And that's the way to do it. We have to have lots of version numbers because we're playing cat and mouse with all these different software vendors. If we don't have lots of version numbers, then we have lots of bugs that may be in a range of dates. And so for us, shipping on a regular cadence with lots of version numbers out there in the wild makes it a lot easier for us to deal with the releases that we have. So we ship every month, and we just shipped 2.0. Plugins became a thing that we documented. We added consistent command line tooling for all the different types of automations that you normally have. Right now, if you're building for Android, you need to know how to use Ant, and you need to know how Android works. And it's the same thing with BlackBerry. And then in Xcode, it was like a tool called Xcode Build. It was just goofy moving between projects, but we created command line tools that are the same for every platform. So if you're working in iOS and then you have to switch to BlackBerry, it's exactly the same command line incantations. We added Windows Phone. We added something called Cordova View, which I probably should talk about more often. It's the ability to embed PhoneGap inside of a native application. This gives you the ability to either migrate a native app away or to PhoneGap, or just embed some web content that needs to access device APIs. Whole bunch of links. So our roadmap. Somebody said we are the Herbert Miller Chair of Global Development. I loved it, so I always bring it up. I don't know if it's true, but whatever. So we have command line tools, and they're all for every platform individually, but we're creating what we're calling like the master script. We're enhancing Winery and Ripple. So we have a plugin API, it's awesome, and a lot of people are using it, but the problem is it's kind of a copy-paste job to create a plugin right now. You'll write some Objective-C, you'll copy it into a folder, and it's very brittle. And so what we really need is packaging. And so if we had a standard package format, that means that we can automate installation. If we have automated installation of plugins, that means we can do discovery. Very much like you see with NPM or CPAN or Maven or any of these tools. We're about, I don't want to give any promises, but we're getting close. This will ship this year. We work with the CSS working group now quite a bit, the device API working group, the widget working group, and we just started working with a new group called SysApps. So SysApps' first sort of mandate is to try and figure out how to deal with runtime permissions and security. So if I go into my browser and I look at Chrome and I click right there, you'll see this is actually a really big deal. The reason that we can't do a lot of stuff in the web today is because we don't have a way of introspecting what permissions we've granted to a particular domain. And so SysApps is looking at this problem. All the major browser vendors are on board, and so are we. We're probably going to be implementing against SysApps sometime in the coming year. I'm really excited about it. So we're on the Agile release train, which means we ship all the time. We ship on a cadence. And so this means our release schedule is pretty set in stone. We didn't drop 2.3 in November. We're actually aiming to drop 2.3 in December instead of a unicorn snowman. Otherwise, that's our release schedule. Apache requires what are called board reports, and they split it up by kind of season, which is great because it gives me a way to split up what we're doing. So autumn's already happened, and so has all this stuff. So this deck actually was accurate. Ripple's kind of cool. It's a emulator for PhoneGap and or any mobile environment. And it looked like it was going to become a sub-project of Cordova. It may become its own top-level project at Apache, we're not sure. Google increased the performance of PhoneGap Android and iOS by 25% in our last release. So that happened too. We have this thing called config XML. It's like for metadata, for like app names, icons, that kind of business. It got out of sync across platforms. I don't know why, it just did. So we're fixing that. I think our next release fixes it. Our most popular plugin is called Child Browser, which when you think about it is a really bad name. So we're renaming it to In-App Browser, because that's what it is. And we're including it in the main API. We have this master script that talked about. So it allows you to do all the command line stuff in one single script. We're working with the Node community for doing our plugin registry. We're hoping soon to have the plugin stuff ready. right now, this weekend, actually, we're working with RIM on hosted Ripple with device proxy. So what the heck does that mean? All right, so Ripple allows you to do all your Cordova or PhoneGap development in the browser. Cool. But you have to fake all these events that the browser doesn't have. We can't pipe in pictures from taking a picture, or we can't like grab accelerometer data and pipe that in. So we're building PhoneGap apps for every platform that will take all of the events from the device, pipe them through a socket server into the browser. So if you take a picture here, it actually shows up in the web browser from a PhoneGap style event. So it'll allow you just to get back to doing your development inside the web browser, hitting refresh and that kind of thing. Zynga came to me and I asked them like what were the top things they needed, and they were like, audio is fucked in HTML5. Yes. So I was like, I will add that to our roadmap, unfuck HTML5 audio. That is basically, that whole bullet point is a lot of work, but that's going to happen. The guy named Jesse McFadden is leading that effort. We're a little bit out of sync with the W3C current APIs. We're catching up though. We're probably going to be auditing, migrating, moving everything to plugins. And so PhoneGap 3, the vision is we ship with no APIs, and then you install and choose and compose what plugins you want, and we'll maintain a core set of APIs based on standards. We already graduated to top level project Apache. Springtime. We're going to continue the API audit. We're going to keep working with the SysApps guys. Everybody builds apps that has push notifications. We get it. So we're going to build that into the project, and we're going to add a default to Urban Airship. You won't have to use Urban Airship if you don't want to use Urban Airship, but everybody already does use Urban Airship, so you might as well use Urban Airship. There's another one called Push Whoosh, I know.
Parse.
Who?
Parse.
Parse.com, yeah. Anyways, we may not build that in, but we
what
may.
is Urban Airship?
They do push notifications. So if you do push notifications, you need a push notification server, which is a real pain in the ass across platforms. And there's a couple guys that do services that do that for you. So you know when you get like an alert on your phone from an app, yeah, that. Basically, it's like a penny for 1,000 push notifications or something, which makes it tricky for costing. Like you want to run an app and a server. This guy named Simon McDonald basically created native pickers for all of the things, so you could put type equals contacts and launch your contacts user in iOS, that type of thing. We're adding that to the platform. We have a bunch of contributors, so if any of them are here, thank you. And once again, our goals: web's a first-class platform and cease to exist. We would prefer it if people didn't use PhoneGap and they built web apps first. That's our goal. And that's it. That's what I got for you guys. Lots of questions. All right, you were first.
Yeah, I'm using Dreamweaver, and I'm trying to work in AdMob mediation. I'm using PhoneGap.
Okay.
Can you talk about that and how that works?
I have no idea. I could look at it with you though. I've never, so you're using the PhoneGap build service then?
Yeah, in Dreamweaver, and I'm trying to.
Is the AdMob plugin just JavaScript?
Pardon me?
Is the AdMob plugin just JavaScript, or is it native code too?
The app is primarily JavaScript.
Yeah.
And so, I know you have an AdMob plugin for PhoneGap, but I'm trying to figure out how to insert it into Dreamweaver.
Yeah, because Dreamweaver uses PhoneGap build in the hood. So PhoneGap build is just slowly adding plugins now, but basically it's vanilla PhoneGap. So you might not be able to use that plugin with it.
So
but before we go, let me take a look at your code, because I might be able to help you do that.
So what, have you seen anyone adding ads to Dreamweaver applications, and what networks are they using to add their ads to?
I have no idea. Yeah, I wouldn't know. But I can help you find out who does.
Okay.
We were actually, a few months ago, we built a couple of mobile apps for Android and iPhone.
Cool.
Using PhoneGap and then having an ad. And then before we could get the ad, the new version of PhoneGap. So every time the new version comes in, do we have to come back and reload and go reload?
No, you don't. Yeah, our update process is fast. But that doesn't mean you have to update all the time. I would recommend trying to stay as close to the edge that we have as possible, because every release of PhoneGap is better than the last, right? We're not regressing, we're not adding bugs. we are adding bugs. We're usually fixing more than we're adding, but.
But it actually requires to recreate APK and RPA files and separate for reapproval.
Right.
Especially with Apple, it's a lot of
It is. It takes a while. Yeah. I would try to at least be working with it locally and stay on the edge. We're pretty good about backwards compatibility at this point. Last year we were really bad about it. We did the name change. But
we had performance issues because we were using jQuery mobile or not. One, I think. Then the newer version of mobile came out. So people were already complaining that performance is a problem. So we have to upgrade. Let's take all the components and upgrade it and mobile, upgrade jQuery, upgrade the PhoneGap, and recreate the APKs and RPA and go for the approval process.
yeah, we get a lot of complaints about that framework. I don't know. I tend to recommend not using it, but I also don't want to tell people what to do. I would just write JavaScript. I'm a masochist, I guess. Yeah.
I'm just now like investigating the whole PhoneGap thing. So I just had a question about your note about app distribution earlier. You were saying that we send the HTML or whatever to our PhoneGap compiles it, sends back to binaries, and then those binaries are what we would submit to whatever marketplace.
Yep.
Okay.
Can you do that for each platform?
Yep. For all the platforms at the same time. You still have to create provisioning profiles and signing certificates for all the platforms, but there's blog posts and wiki articles on how to do that. So one of the fun things that this means is that you don't have to have a Mac to build an iOS app, or vice versa, a Windows machine to build for Windows 8. Yeah.
Can you describe your goals for HTML5 audio?
So the dude named Jesse McFadden and another guy named Danny Trice are going to be working on it. We know that some of the issues include not multi-tracking, backgrounding can be an issue, long play beyond some weird arbitrary number on some platforms will just die. So all those are on the table.
Metadata and the stream?
I don't know. You mean the crazy Google stuff? Like the
so Shoutcast has been around forever, then there's HLS, and these things will, like, as you change track on the server side, then you can send metadata that
I haven't
Winning can get, but nothing else really.
Right. I haven't heard anything around that. Like, all I know is that we want to fix the audio tag itself to work as expected as possible, including possibly transcoding. It's another thing that's on the agenda. Maybe we can do this. It would be crazy, but it could be possible. Yeah. If you're interested in being involved in giving input on that one, shoot me your email. Mine's.
Yeah, we've got 4 audio apps in the Apple Store with 60 more to come. So
That's my email.
Knowing where it's going.
If you wanna get in touch, if anybody here wants to get in touch with me, that's my email address.
Excellent, thank you.
I'd love the input because that effort will be starting soon, and so we'll just backlog it. And if we don't get to it right away, it'll at least be in our roadmap. Yep.
So I would love a Chrome web view. You mentioned that you're experimenting.
In Android 2.3, yeah, a lot of people want it. I know it's painful. Yeah, you would have the penalty of actually the current build of Chromium, believe it or not, on Android is 17 megs. We can't figure out why. So it's actually smaller than it would be if you built it locally. I have no idea why. We just figured this out like a week ago. And we only have it running right now on Android 4. So there's still a lot of backporting to do.
Doesn't Google build its own version of WebKit just for all platforms?
Sorry?
Doesn't Google have 2 versions of WebKit running on all
Oh man, I can't hear you, I'm old.
Doesn't Google run ports of WebKit or Chrome on version 3 and 4.0?
Yeah. Yeah, it's there. We have 3 Chrome team members working with us on this stuff. It's a big moving target, and Android's update process is kind of weird, and there's politics, I think, between those 2 teams, if I were to inject some color commentary. But that Chrome's there, and it's going to become the first-class browser, I'm guessing, in the next year.
What about size concerns that you have on gingerbread? Because phones that support gingerbread don't have enough RAM for a lot of applications.
Yeah, we've always been more on the smartphone side of things, so we kind of didn't really care about the feature phones, and now we kind of don't care about the older phones. But I get it, like people have to ship on old devices. I was at Home Depot today, and they're using Windows CE in some cases, so. And they're running a WebKit on it, actually. Yeah, you're in a resource-constrained environment. That happens. Yeah.
Do you have the link to the slideshow? I noticed it was on that first slide there.
Oh yeah, sure, man. Oh, that doesn't help you at all. I'm writing this locally, aren't I? There it is, right there. Yeah.
Yeah, we basically want to take an existing single-page app and then add a little bit of camera supports and GPS and package the app store. Does that sound incredibly painful or incredibly easy just on that scale?
If it's a single-page app, it's super easy. It's hard when you've got an app that's hosted or whatever. But if it's built standalone and it talks to like a third-party API through RESTful JSON type techniques, then you're all good.
That's kind of our really going for just the pure this mobile app or this web app. Then we got some requirements coming down that want to be able to access the camera and do some other things like that. So, and they're pushing us to hire iOS developers, and we're really trying to avoid that. So,
yeah, man. Yeah, that's what PhoneGap's for. That right there. The camera support's coming to these phones, but if they need it now, then yeah, PhoneGap's the way to go for sure, or a way to go.
Go ahead.
Yes.
Are there any phone issues that you like PhoneGap with Essential Touch?
We know that Essential Touch is basically tested on iOS, and I'm certain they have Android devices. I just don't know that they've turned them on. So yeah, we hear about performance issues with it. It's awesome on iOS though.
Can I just make a comment here real quick? A lot of people I know are using Kendo UI instead of Sencha because it's much more responsive and faster. And the other one to look at is Enyo. Enyo and Kendo UI instead of Sencha.
Yeah, actually there's another one, new one, Mobile.js from the MooTools guys. And it's also pretty, like it nails it pretty well. I would encourage you to just try and build an app first though, or you try and pick a framework to solve the problems because you tell may or may not have. Yeah.
Back to his question. I'm trying to port an app to PhoneGap from the web. I'm using Sinatra as my platform.
Okay.
Basically, does my file system structure stay the same, everything underneath www, or do I have to remove, does your paths, all that good stuff?
I mean, if you're using, there's a few ways you can do this. So if you're using Sinatra as your web server layer, then you probably got routing and pages reloading and stuff.
Right. It's a one-page app.
It's a single-page app?
Yeah. I'm only using.
Well, there's a pretty good chance it would just work then. You would just take the rendered web assets and you would package those. But another angle, and Apple would get cranky at me for saying this, we have a security feature that's called enable remote URL. I used to call it backdoor, but then IBM's like, oh, that's insecure, so they changed it to enable remote URL. Made it secure, apparently. Anyways, it allows you to load a remote URL. So that's another option that you can tackle. If you try and get that into the App Store though, and the first thing they'll test is whether it's online or offline capable. Obviously, if it's not online, then that wouldn't work. So the trick is you go to remote, you have a home page. The home page will use our network API to check if network connectivity is there. If there is, window.location to your remote place. If there isn't, some meaningful error message. A, you need a network to use this application. And people get stuff in the App Store all the time with that. Android, they don't care. You can ship whatever garbage you want in there. And Microsoft's actually becoming quite strict. So their App Store, you would need a good offline story too. And I don't know what the story is, but I imagine they'll take whatever they can.
If you were looking to build an app and you were evaluating building specifically for a platform or using PhoneGap, I mean, and you PhoneGap, I mean, did you just lose just a small amount of functionality that you might be able to get if you built specifically for the platform? Or if you built something directly for iOS?
Right, the sort of lowest common denominator concern.
I mean, most of these apps, at least the good apps, in my opinion, tend to do one thing really well. Like we had a client come to us once at Nitobe, and it was like, imagine Facebook, now imagine 10 times as many features. And he thought that was awesome. And we were like, oh god, that sounds terrible. Right? Like, that sounds like the worst app ever, man. Like, so like your dialer, it's a dialer. Your text messaging is technically, you know, an email client might be one of the most complicated applications you could possibly muster. That still is something that people would want to use on a day-to-day basis. So I'm spinning this. I understand that. I'm throwing it back at you. Maybe you want to build a bunch of apps instead of building one big app that does a bunch of stuff. And that's actually a good strategy too, in a way. So in an app store, if you want to have better coverage or better sort of search result attention, if you have a bunch of apps, then you're going to get your brand in there a little better than if you have.
Yeah, I'm not thinking as much in terms of something I'm going to sell. I'm thinking about it for an enterprise web app that we build. If we want to be able to download a mobile app to use to facilitate the site.
Right. Yeah. I mean, the different platforms have different characteristics that you may or may not have access to. iOS's thing, I guess, is actually it's just known for its like smooth speed and usability. Android's thing is its integration with the operating system, the intent, the ability to jump between things. And in the case of Windows Phone, it's Alive Tiles. In the case of BlackBerry, it seems to be all about gestures. And none of those things really have anything to do with your app. So your app could be pretty cross-platform, I think.
You know,
most of these mobile apps are big lists with buttons.
I'm pretty surprised in what you just said that you left. I mean, you left out the most important thing.
What's that?
Standardization.
Standardization. Okay.
The fracturedness of Android and Windows phones.
Yeah.
Is what's killing it. It's not. I mean, look between the any version of iPhones.
75% market share is doing pretty good.
Well, no, but I'm saying that the fracturedness though, because you can't upgrade an Android version from one or Android phone from one version to another, at least not easily on all of them. The fact that the screen size, except for the iPhone 5, has been standardized. There's
you're talking about like upgrade your app. You mean like
the OS?
I built an app and then a new phone.
No, I'm talking about the OS in Androids.
Okay.
But I mean I'm just saying that with Windows mobile phones and with Androids, there are different sizes. There are different.
iOS suffers this too. They all got that problem. But like I don't know. I think PhoneGap actually solves this better than anyone. Web views, viewports, text resizing is easy, and it is hard in native code to deal with fragmentation. Although the rumors of Android's demise are, I think, a little exaggerated. It's doing pretty.
Well, I don't think it's going away. I'm just talking about the difference in sizes and the different.
Yeah, we got to embrace that though. Like that's just the nature of it.
Well, I mean, if you're expecting iPhone to be the same, you are in for a horrible shock. In the last 2 years, Apple has released 4 different screen sizes and 6 or 8 different resolutions, which means you have 14 different possible combinations of devices and compatibility layers to test across, which is
not to mention icons, splash screens.
Which is more than any one person can really do without falling into a hole of terrible non.
But this is why the web is awesome, right? So like this is exactly the problem that internet thing solved. But yeah, I don't know. I also don't find it that horrific. Like people talk about the fragmentation, but the phones are cycling really fast too. We don't see any Android 1.5s anymore, thank God. And hopefully we're not going to see any more Android 2.2s soon. So, you know, while there is fragmentation, the devices tend to die off pretty quick anyways. Yeah?
Do you guys have any numbers for what is the Apple application approval rate for hybrid?
Can you repeat the question, please?
You wanted to know how many apps Apple approves. I can tell you over beers numbers I know. I'm not going to do it in front of a camera. Yeah.
So, you know, with the different phones, there were pretty different user experience, right? Like, most Apple people, I hand them my Android, they freak out because they have no idea what to
do, and I don't know what to do. Their phones are like, there's only one button, I don't get this.
Right.
So for the whole user experience design with PhoneGap, how would you go about, like I guess I'm kind of stuck in, you know, now I actually just finished learning iPhone, and now I'm like, okay, I have to think completely different when I'm designing one app versus the other.
Yeah, so the big sort of, I talked about this earlier, David. So back in like the late 90s and early 2000s, every enterprise tried to build a web GUI that looked like Outlook Express. We all did this. I am guilty of this myself. We don't do that shit anymore. Except for on mobile, we do. So it's interesting that we try and emulate these native platform OS conventions. When really, they're just a brand, right? I just unplugged my computer, but we have a set of UX resources that we're working on sharing that show designing an app front to end and creating a brand for that application. And that's what, to me, that's the right way to do it. But I'm not here to like tell anyone how to build their apps. Like, it's the web, it's an open field. You can do whatever makes sense to you and your customers. But your brand is probably cross-platform, whereas Apple's certainly isn't, right? And so I think that key there is that you want to respect the affordances of the platform. You want to have back buttons in iOS, but you don't have to make them look like Apple's back button, right? You can make that back button look like it would fit on the Android platform too. So that's kind of my cheesy answer. I have a concrete one, but you'll have to email me and I'll send you the resources that we're working on putting together for our UX stuff. It's being baked. It's early, but we go end to end on building a to-do-like application for all the platforms using PhoneGap. And we've got the design comps and the development's like halfway through, so it's really early, but it's all on GitHub today if you want to take a look at it. If you can remember, it's github.com/Jahoni. And the, I know, just email me. Yeah.
So how do you guys handle device testing?
Oh, that's a good question. That's like a perfect question for beers. So testing is horrible. We just created a thing called Medic that makes it a little bit easier. So the guys at Selenium have come up with this thing called Fruitstrap, which allows you to programmatically install and instantiate an application in iOS. We're using that. Android's really good. You have tooling up. You can do anything with Android. So what we do is we will take when there's a commit lands to our Git repos, we have a post commit hook that will take that source code, it'll compile it, it'll then install it onto a wall of phones that we have at our office, and it'll instantiate an app that runs unit tests, that posts those unit tests back to a Couch instance, which we then look at from an aggregate standpoint to see if we're passing or failing. Another thing we do is we don't really test like UI type stuff. We're testing basically our JavaScript layer, because that's the layer of abstraction that we're fighting against. And our new sort of policy is that we don't write tests in advance. We only write tests for bugs that we have verified that exist. It's really deliberate because we have too many tests, and so it's really slow to run on the phones as is. And we're finding that our users will find bugs quicker than anyone else anyways, and so we'll turn those into tests. And then, obviously, we don't do a release that regresses ever. So we don't have a release where a bug reappears because we have tests to check that. So that's how we're testing today. There's some joking that we might build a robot with a hot dog finger that'll like poke around, but we haven't got around to it. Yep.
Yeah, I'm not a programmer. This may seem naive, but like a programmer, we create everything in Edge. We're dealing with a company that then compiles it for iOS and Android for us. Will PhoneGap be able to do that if we take the Edge animations that we create and the menus that we create in Edge and do it through PhoneGap?
Yeah, I've been meaning since I joined Adobe to see what that integration story could look like. I know we've roadmapped actual direct integration from Edge Animate into PhoneGap, but it will work, but I don't know on what phones. I'm certain it'll work on iOS. I'm fairly certain it'll work on Android. I'm skeptical it's going to work in BlackBerry. Well, actually, no, I think it'll work in BlackBerry. I'm skeptical it'll work in Windows Phone. But I don't know for sure. Yeah. I'm sorry if that's not a very good answer. If you want, you can email me, and I can follow up with the product manager though in Edge Animate, and I can give you probably a general timeline within like a 5-month range of when you could expect integration with PhoneGap. Her name's Sarah Hunt. You can find her online. She's cool.
I had actually been in contact with her through the forums.
Cool.
When Edge totally sucked. It sucks way less now. I mean, it's really pretty good, except my programmer was telling me just today it started crashing and it crashed like 6 times on it. But we created a lot of stuff in it, but he doesn't know why it was crashing because it was working fine yesterday. But
yeah, I don't know.
But so she would have.
I'm a little ashamed to admit I never launched that product.
Okay, because she would have more information about what your timeline is for PhoneGap.
Sarah would for sure. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, she'd know. She's the product owner for Edge Animate. She would be like my analog.
It does some pretty cool stuff. We've been able to recreate like 11 years of Flash programming in it, but there's a lot of constraints still. It's still a really new product.
Yeah, and like another angle for the Edge Tools team is that we're also attacking the other side of the problem, and that's making the browser better. So we're definitely pushing the edge of what the browser can do today.